Superhot let you choreograph bullets midair and feel like an action hero. Celeste turned one simple dash into a platformer people still speedrun to this day. Inscryption infused deck building with escape room horror and rewired what a card game could be. And Hollow Knight turns a simple jump and slash into hours of exploring secret tunnels and hidden rooms. All of these games are very well known for very different reasons, but they all share one origin. Each of these games started out in a very short yet stressful sprint called a game jam. These are just a few major successes, but there are thousands of game jam games released every year that people haven't even heard about. Whether you're a player or a developer, it really brings up the question, should you care about game jams? Let's start by taking a deep dive into some of these games and seeing how they went from a game jam prototype all the way to successful commercial releases. Starting off with Superhot. Superhot was made for the 7-day FPS challenge in 2013, where they had 7 days to, well, make an FPS. This is longer than most game jams, as they're usually only a weekend long, but these longer game jams definitely help you prioritize your health a little bit more versus staying up for 72 hours straight on nothing but energy drinks. The general rule of thumb for a game jam is you want to restrict yourself as much as possible. If you're having a hard time describing your game idea without saying a bunch of and thens, then the game is probably just too complicated for a game jam. Because of this, the Superhot team came up with one very simple yet genius mechanic to follow. Time moves when you do. This turned a genre of games that are usually very high adrenaline, turn your brain off and go type of games into a much more tactical game with a puzzle-like nature. After the game jam, the developers soon saw that people loved it, and they realized that they had something incredibly special. Because of this, they took to Kickstarter, where they absolutely crushed their goal, and they released it in 2016 on PC. Since then, they've released on a bunch of other platforms, most notably being VR, turning it into one of the most iconic VR games to date. I love VR, and playing this game for the first time was one of the most immersive experiences I've ever had playing games. Moving away from a complex 3D shooter, let's take a look at a simple 2D platformer, Celeste. Celeste was originally made for the Pico 8 Game Jam. This engine was built for very simple, retro-style games with very limited graphics and mechanics. The original version of Celeste had around 30 levels that were all built around very precise platforming that all revolved around this very simple yet satisfying dash. The game was extremely simple, but also extremely addicting. After the Game Jam, it was uploaded to itch and was extremely well received. This inspired the devs to continue working on the game while keeping that really tight and precise platforming and that awesome game feel, while also introducing a story about anxiety, self-doubt, and self-growth. Since then, this game has sold around 3 or 5 million copies and is proof that a game doesn't have to be insanely complicated to be fun. Despite the mechanics being incredibly simple, this game has been fine-tuned to perfection and just feels amazing to play. So we just looked at two games that pretty much just continued to make the same game and improve upon it, but let's talk about a game that more inspired a much larger project. That game is Inscryption. The original version of Inscryption was made for Ludum Dare 43. The theme of the original jam was sacrifices must be made. And so Daniel Mullins created a card game where you have to sacrifice weaker cards in order to play stronger cards. It brought in a lot of horror elements as you're playing against this creepy guy inside of his cabin. But after the game jam, that was about it. After finishing Pony Island, Daniel Mullins decided he wanted to make a much bigger game. Something that starts as a creepy card game after this game jam turns into something way bigger. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but as someone who doesn't really play too many card games, Inscryption is one of my all-time favorite games ever, and you definitely need to play it if you haven't already. All of these games so far have had very similar gameplay to their original game jam prototypes, but for Hungry Knight, aka Hollow Knight, that's not the case at all. The game was made for Ludum Dare 27, where the theme was 10 seconds, and featured the iconic Knight character from Hollow Knight, along with all sorts of weird bug creatures. In this top-down game, you just kind of go around and kill these different bug creatures, and if you can't take one of these guys out within 10 seconds, then you die. Killing an enemy resets your health back to 100%, and you do that all the way until you make it to the goal. As you can see, Hungry Knight plays nothing like what Hollow Knight is today, but that's what makes this game in particular so interesting. It's a great example of how game jams can spark ideas past just the gameplay itself. In this case, it was the foundation for all of the characters, tone, and world building that we see in Hollow Knight today. All of these games follow a very similar yet unique path. At their very core, they're simple games, and even in their final released versions, none of them feel bloated with mechanics and features like all sorts of other games coming out these days. And that right there is the magic to game jams. There's literally no time to add on a bunch of unnecessary features early on. And the fact is, developers do overcomplicate and add way too much to game jams all the time, but when they do, guess what happens? They don't finish them on time, and they don't work on them after the game jams are over. The projects that survive are the ones that are simple and found the fun early. And this all ties perfectly with a game design framework called MDA. If you want a game to feel good and connect with players, every single decision you make for your game needs to follow this framework. M is mechanics, and these are the things that the player can do. In the original Mario, examples of mechanics are walking and jumping. We're not doing anything with them yet, it's just simply walking and jumping. What we're doing with those mechanics is D. D is for dynamics, and this is how these mechanics actually interact. This can be jumping from platform to platform and avoiding enemies, or it could be jumping on top of a Goomba's head to take it out. Lastly, A is for aesthetics, and in this case, this doesn't mean looks, this means how the player should be feeling. As players learn to move and jump with confidence, they should feel joy and mastery. But later in the game, they might feel tension when they see a new enemy that they haven't encountered, or empowerment after grabbing a fire flower. Game jams force developers to spend time really refining these core elements that make the game, rather than just throwing in random features to make the game feel bigger. All of this up to now makes it seem like just good scope control is something you need when creating your game. Nothing that's too specific for game jams, so why should we care? And that's where the other main aspect of game jams really comes into play, and that is the random theme. Since every single game jam has a random theme that's kept a complete secret until it starts, there's no such thing as recycling old projects or starting early. Developers are people, and people tend to get comfortable with things. This puts a lot of developers in a trap where they know what they're good at and just kind of want to stick with it. This causes a lot of ideas to get shot down, and whether or not they realize it, they keep making the same games over and over. Their ideas aren't driven by creativity now, they're driven by what they know they can do. But this secret theme doesn't let developers do that anymore. They have to adapt and try out new things, and because they're working in a completely blank canvas, there's no fear of messing a bunch of stuff up. This forces even very seasoned developers out of their comfort zone and pushes them to make these awesome and creative games that us players enjoy so much. And it's also a great time for them to learn things that they can pull into their larger game projects. If you're a developer, consider throwing yourself into a jam. It's one of the best ways you can push yourself no matter what your skill level is and discover what really makes your ideas fun. And if you're a player, go on to itch.io. You might stumble across something incredibly fun, and your feedback could help shape its future and turn it into one of these massive successful releases. And speaking of game jams, did you guys know that Peak actually started as a game jam? If you want to learn why that's so important, you can click right here, or if you feel inspired by this video and want to make a game all by yourself, you can click right here to get started.